सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen though.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
This episode of Cut the Clutter, I will start with a riddle. And unlike in the past, when I do boo-boos like giving it away in the thumbnail or the headline, now I am taking care not to do so. So tell me, which country are we talking about? If I told you that it's a tiny country, okay, I will tell you it's in the Middle East. But it's so tiny, it is half the size in terms of area of a country that we know to be a very tiny country, that is Israel. So half the area of tiny Israel, where tourists buy t-shirts, they say, the smallest big country in the world, and population, native population, which is about 4% of Israel. If Israel is about 9 million, this country has less than 4 lakhs. Its population, now I'm giving it away a little bit, its population actually is 2.8 million, somewhere between 28 to 29 lakhs, but only 11% of it is native population. The rest are expatriates or immigrants. Now, I've given you some indications about the country. Let me tell you some more. This country is landlocked to the extent that it shares its land border only with one country or one region, but that country and that region has blockaded it. So it is landlocked on that side. It opens out to the sea on one side. Since we talking about the Middle East, let me give one more fact away, that this opens out to the Persian Gulf. Now, that is, I'm sure most of you have figured this out. Then I will tell you some more interesting things about the country. The country is very friendly with Iran. It's very friendly with Iran, so much so that it is even known to fund many of the militant / terrorist / Islamist organizations active in the Middle East on the behest of Iran, including Hezbollah, for example. Interesting, isn't it? At the same time, it is also a tiny country where most of US's forces are headquartered in the Middle East. So US Central Command, while its base is in Florida in the US, its operational command is now in this country. The biggest US Air Force base in the region in this country. The biggest US naval base in the region for the Middle East is at a port next door to this country, not far away. I know you know the country, but let me still keep it at the riddle level, because this is such an interesting little country, little you know the area and the population. This country also shares an oil field with Iran. It's an island oil field. It's just an island that's sitting on a pile of oil and gas. More gas than oil, actually essentially gas. How big is this? This is an island or a gas field of 9,700 square kilometers. Remember, this country is only 11,500 square kilometers. So this island is 9,700 square kilometers, of which 6,000 belong to this tiny country, 3,700 belong to Iran. Again, what do these territories hold? In the 6,000 kilometers that this tiny country owns, you find 1,800 trillion cubic feet of gas. On the Iranian side, there is 600 trillion cubic feet of gas. So this tiny country has 3 times as much gas as Iran. This actually is the biggest gas field in the world. If you Google the largest gas field in the world, you will know the name of South Pars and North Dome. So South Pars is the area that's with Iran, and North Dome is the area that's with the other country that we are talking about. So once again, a big shared economic interest. In fact, besides the gas found there, there is also gas-based sediments, which are about 50 billion barrels. So you can just keep counting, this will not end. A big oil and gas power. It is also the richest country in the world. for some time. Its per capita income is more than $140,000 a year. It's a lot. I mean, if you compare this with Switzerland, which a lot of people in popular belief think is the richest, it's more than 1.5 times richer than Switzerland on a per capita basis. It is richer than all the other of the richest countries in the world. In fact, even Singapore is only 103,000. So it is much richer than all of them. In fact, if you look at its GDP, a total GDP for a tiny country like that, a country of less than 4 lakh natives, its GDP is $360 billion. You want me to put that in perspective? Okay, so all of Pakistan, population of 230 million people, 23 crore people, has a GDP of 314 billion. This tiny country with less than 4 lakh natives has the GDP of 360 billion. So you can imagine what a big power this country is. And now I'll tell you one or two things that will be a complete giveaway, because this is also a tiny country which does not have much freedom of the press within, but funds a lot of freedom of the press around the world, because it runs big media organization based in itself, which is free to write anything it wants to write for most parts of the world, particularly some things that are irritating to its neighbors, not question its own government very much. That organization is called Al-JAZEERA. So since I told you I'm giving you some giveaways, let me also mention that this tiny country has also been a patron of art, culture, journalism from around the world. This is also the country where our own M.F. Hossein took refuge when he said he was harassed in India. So he went to this country, which also happens to be tax-free. That's very convenient. So we are talking about Qatar. And the reason we are talking about Qatar is that, led by Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries which had boycotted it, which had blackballed it, which had blockaded it 3 years back, have now lifted the blockade. So before I go ahead, I will tell you what is GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council. This has 6 countries, that is Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait and Qatar. So essentially 5 countries had turned on Qatar, 4 very aggressively, that is Saudi Arabia, UAE most aggressively in fact, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain and Oman. Kuwait a little bit less, and in fact it's Kuwait's foreign minister who's also played a diplomatic role in bringing about this kind of rapprochement. Now you see this tiny country with all these games being played around it. So you might imagine that what is this tiny country? This must be a puppet which is being run by, which is being made to play or dance by other people controlling the puppet strings. The fact is to the contrary. This little country is also a big powerhouse in its own right. So there are lots of puppets dancing around it, including Libya, Syria. It's a bit much to call Iran a puppet, but in the sense that it's a player, it is a puppet in the region. And all of them, if they were puppets, their strings are controlled by the ruler of this country, the ruler of Qatar. So the current leader of Qatar is Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, very wise man. Thanis have ruled Qatar since 1850. So they are among the oldest dynasties in the Middle East. Now his predecessor had taken over in 1995, and among the first things he did after taking over was to set up Al-JAZEERA, the media network. And that gave Qatar special powers because it became the only Gulf country, the only Arab country, in fact the only Islamic country with a big media empire which carries influence all across the world, particularly in the Western world. So they created a powerhouse to rival the BBC in many ways. That's what Al-JAZEERA was. And in fact, if I see the list of demands that the other Gulf countries made when they decided to blockade and boycott Qatar in 2017, and I will get into the reasons as to why that happened. The demands were curb diplomatic ties with Iran, sever all ties to terrorist organizations, that is Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, etc., and declare all of these as terrorist groups. Qatar has had connections with all of these. Shut down Al-JAZEERA and its affiliated stations. Obviously, that is something that I would find most repugnant because it's a fine media organization, should not be shut down. But that was the third demand on the list of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, etc., that they put forward. Of the 13 demands they put forward to Qatar. And then there were demands like shut all the other news outlets that Qatar funds directly and indirectly, immediately terminate all Turkish military presence, stop all funding of individuals who are dissidents or who are called terrorists by Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Bahrain, US and other countries, and interference in sovereign countries' internal affairs, etc., etc., etc. So the rest are not as material, but that list goes on to say that you pay us reparations for the damage caused by your activities in the past few years, and we will put an audit on you that will work on a monthly basis, and after we've seen good conduct on a quarterly basis, and the amount of reparations we will decide, but in consultation with you. So this was really a surrender document. Qatar refused to surrender. In fact, over the 3 years, from whatever I read, Qatar has emerged stronger than it was. Because what it did was that it leaned on Iran instead, because it was locked off from the land side. But it opens out on the Persian Gulf side. It already has a partnership with Iran on these gas fields. So it began to get all its essential supplies from Iran. Iran became a big trading partner. Iran also became a big strategic and tactical partner. And that led to many complications. How can a tiny country in which US CENTCOM is based, how can a tiny country which is a member of Gulf Cooperation Council led by Saudi Arabia, how can a tiny country with a predominantly Sunni population, a small but a Sunni population, be so friendly with Iran? In fact, it became the friendliest Arab country to Iran. You could even say that for this period, it was the only Arab country truly friendly to Iran. And this came to a head. These irritations were building up over time between Qatar and the other Gulf countries. But this really built up in 2017, because what happened in 2017 was that in April 2017, a bunch of Qataris, I think 26 Qataris, were taken hostage in Iraq by insurgents or terrorists linked to Iran. These groups, to which hundreds of millions of ransom was paid out to get these Qatari hostages freed, including Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Council, IRGC, whose boss Qasim Soleimani was recently assassinated by the Americans. Then Hezbollah, which is really an Iran-funded, Iran-led operation in Lebanon against Israel, and Iraq's group called Kataib Hezbollah, which is also a Shia group. So these were all jihadists from the Shia side who were paid off, and the Arab countries were upset about this. So this was the spark in 2017 April. But problem had started in 2016. In 2016, if you go back and jog your memory, Saudis decided to execute a Shia cleric, and the Shia cleric's name was Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr. And that happened in January 2016. When that happened, Gulf countries decided to break all contact with Iran, and that's when they broke diplomatic relations with Iran. Qatar, on the other hand, it joined in but did not break diplomatic relations. It recalled its ambassador. That's a bit like India and Pakistan have recalled their high commissioners, but diplomatic ties continue. So they recalled their ambassador but let diplomatic ties continue, and then also broke from the pack, because 2017 April, after the ransom incident took place that irritated the Arab countries too much, or Gulf countries too much, Trump came to Riyadh in May 2017. And that's when he endorsed the Saudi call of joint action against Iran. Rather than join the Saudi call for joint action against Iran, the Qatari ruler was quoted by his own country's news agency as saying, questioning this anti-Iran sentiment and saying what is the big deal, why this anti-Iran sentiment, and also that he called in that same statement Hezbollah a legitimate resistance organization and also called Iran a big power. Now later the Qataris said that this was the agency's computers were hacked. The Sheikh never said it, but everybody knew that he had said it, and that got the Saudi and UAE rulers backs up. So they decided in June 2017 on a full-fledged boycott and blockade of Qatar. That has now been lifted. Now what does this lifting of the blockade mean? Why should we be so bothered? One tiny country has got blockade on it lifted by its neighbors. What's the big deal? So before we understand what it means to the region and to the world, because this country is the fulcrum of so many games being played in the world right now. Before we understand what does it mean, we have to understand why have they got here now. Because the differences between Qatar and the other countries that boycotted it were very strong. In fact, they began in 2011 when after the Arab Spring in Egypt, there was an election post Hosni Mubarak and a government of the Muslim Brotherhood came in, President Morsi's government. Now that was a Muslim Brotherhood government. The Saudis and the rest of the Gulfis did not like it because they saw Muslim Brotherhood as a revolutionary Islamist organization that would threaten their regimes. Because it's one thing that worries rulers in the Middle East, it's spelled with D. It's called democracy. Because democracy means numbers, the logic of numbers, that means that you cannot be controlling everything because you are the custodian of the mosques, of the holiest of the Muslim mosques. Power will then go to whoever gets the most votes. So these countries did not want Muslim Brotherhood, but Qatar on the other hand patronized and supported Muslim Brotherhood, and that went on like that until in 2013 in a coup that was supported by Gulf countries, Sisi pulled down the Morsi government. So this antagonism goes back that far.